If you look at the direction of traffic, if you look at the judgments of the courts, they really are increasingly recognizing that the best possible future for South Africa is one in which you have really strong, powerful, decentralized powers.
What's the reason why people are moving to Cape Town in such high numbers from the rest of the country?
There is opportunity here for their children for the future. A prospect of a better life for them, that is essential.
Yeah.
We've said we will protect the professionalism of the civil service, and truly politicians like to take credit for things, but the extraordinary results that Cape Town has delivered are thanks to an extraordinary group of people who work in the city of Cape Town, who know that they are rewarded and that they are valued for the value that they add and the results that they deliver.
Now we have a government of national unity, but it does seem that locally there's still a lot of friction when it comes to politics. So how does it play out?
I really think that this idea that everything, every policy, every legislation must be the same for South Africa is a strange concept for a country as big as ours. It's not Botswana, it's not Eswatini or Lesotho. It's an enormous country with a large population, and it makes total sense that different parts of the country should be able to try different things.
Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. This is Ernst Roots, and we're sitting here filming this interview in the beautiful city of Cape Town, a city which has recently been announced as the best city in the world. We're going to be talking about Cape Town, but also about the idea of having a city identity or having some attachment to the place where you live, what that implies and so forth. And I'm sure some broader topics relating to this. And we are very privileged and honored to have the Mayor of Cape Town, Mr. Geordin Hill-Lewis, to discuss with us these issues. Mr. Geordin Hill-Lewis, thank you very much.
Very nice to meet you.
Great to have you here.
Nice to meet you.
I believe congratulations is in order. So
Thank you.
Just help us to make sense of this announcement.
Yeah.
What does it imply? How was it made? And why do they say Cape Town is the best city?
Well, it's confirming what we always already knew, but seriously, it's a wonderful accolade, and we're very, very thrilled with that. It's by an organization called Time Out, which is a very big global travel publication, and they did a global survey of their readers. About 18,500 responded, and they took those results and then submitted them to a judging panel of kind of travel writers and experts, and then came up with a final ranking, which Cape Town won for 2025. Now, I must say, last year we were number 2, just behind the Big Apple, New York City. And at that time, I had an opportunity to spend some time in New York City and to meet the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams. And I told him at the time that Cape Town, we get very competitive. We take this seriously. So we were very proud to be number 2 to the Big Apple, but we weren't going to leave it there. Yeah. We were going to actually take them on. And so I took great delight last week in messaging him, sending him a text to say,
you did? You kept your promise.
We kept our promise. We came for you, and now we're number 1.
Yeah, that's
so
fantastic.
It's great for the city.
And so you've been mayor now for a while. On this podcast also we've spoken with Celia Brink, who was the mayor of Pretoria. Celia, or Mr. Brink, had a very unique situation, of course, with the coalition. And after this was published, there was a realignment. Some of the parties have shifted, and he's not the mayor anymore.
Sadly.
Yes, which I can say, from my perspective, I actually don't know someone who was glad or happy about him not being the mayor. He was a very popular mayor. But let's talk about this first for a bit. What's the dynamics like here is in terms of your position, because what came out in the conversation about Pretoria is the extent to which there's a difference between the national government and the local government. Now we have a government of national unity, but it does seem that locally there's still a lot of friction when it comes to politics. So how does it play out?
Local government in South Africa is absolutely fraught We, I must say, have a remarkable blessing and privilege, and it is thanks to the voters that we have an outright majority in Cape Town, the Democratic Alliance, the party I represent. We have an outright majority, and we have for some time. And that means that we can govern without a coalition partner. And we have a relatively healthy majority. And that removes a great deal of that complexity. Obviously, as I always say, every politician in government, whether you're in an external coalition or not, you're always managing a coalition. Sometimes it's just an internal coalition. But it is nevertheless 100% true that it is less complex and much, much better to be governing with an outright majority. But the fact is, in probably more than 90% of South Africa's local municipalities and cities, that is just not the case. So we have to make it work with a coalition.
Yeah. So I asked this question to Helen Zeller also when she was here. The question is why, not whether the Western Cape is governed better or Cape Town is governed better, but why is it governed better? Because even if you want to argue that it isn't, it's hard to argue with the statistics.
It is
Cape Town has its problems, certainly, but what's the reason why people are moving to Cape Town in such high numbers from the rest of the country?
Cape Town is emphatically part of South Africa, and we like it like that, and that means we are not immune from South Africa's problems. We have huge poverty, huge unemployment, subject to an economy that hasn't grown much at all in South Africa for the last 15 years or so. So all of those, and the problems that they present for our society. But you are absolutely right. It's impossible to argue with the statistics on every metric, whether it be the population's wellness, even life expectancy, education levels, employment levels, full 10% or more lower than the rest of South Africa. This province, the city, and some other municipalities in the province are just head and shoulders above the rest of the country. Why? Well, I think one of the most important things that we have done is to respect and protect the professionalism of the civil service. And that is why I still think one of the most important things the DA has done is to take on cadre deployment, which is this idea that you can pack the civil service with loyal political apparatchiks, and that will answer to you. They will be accountable not on the basis of their performance or value add, but on the basis of political loyalty, who's going up and who's coming down, and so on. And that has been disastrous for the South African state. It has totally hollowed out the capacity of the South African state to the point where there's this constant debate why so little gets done at a national level in South Africa. I do not necessarily always think it's ideological or even necessarily corruption. A lot of it might be that, but in fact it is the outworking, the manifestation, the final result of cadre deployment crippling the state,
which leads to incompetence. The wrong people being put in the important positions,
where you just can't get anything complex, even basic things done anymore. Now, I still think the most important thing that we have done is we've never gone down that path. We've said we will protect the professionalism of the civil service. And truly, politicians like to take credit for things, but the extraordinary results that Cape Town has delivered are thanks to an extraordinary group of people who work in the city of Cape Town, who know that they are rewarded and that they are valued for the value that they add and the results that they deliver, and not for any other reason.
Yeah. So I'm very privileged in the sense that an important part of my job is to do international relations. So I travel a lot for work and to America and Europe and so forth. And something I noticed is that the idea of a city is often or mostly more romantic than the idea of a country. So to say I'm going to Paris sounds much better than I'm going to France. Or to say I'm going to Budapest sounds better than I'm going to Hungary, and so forth. And there are actually few exceptions.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same with Cape Town. The idea of if you are an American and you say I'm going to visit Cape Town, it just sounds better than saying I'm going to South Africa. And it's interesting why that is. Perhaps it's because people associate the country or the state more with corruption and the criticisms of the government and so forth, and people associate the city more with the beauty of the city. But there's some interesting dynamic there with having a sense of city identity and being proud of your city. And how would you define that, or how do you see that in sort of the Cape Town context?
I think that's a great point. And now that I think about it, many people will first describe themselves as a New Yorker or a Londoner or a Parisian, in your example, first, before they describe themselves as belonging to a national identity. So I think cities, particularly these big globally iconic cities, as Cape Town undoubtedly is, have a very strong city identity, and I kind of love that. I think that's wonderful. There is a lot of pride in Cape Town for what Cape Town has and is achieving, and there's also a lot of uniqueness in Cape Town. If you think of the things that happen in Cape Town, the uniqueness of the Kaapse Klopse, you'll have to explain that to the international audience, but it is so utterly Cape Townian, and the Guma drum and the wonderful cultural history of jazz and District 6 and different cultural groups, ethnicities, religions living cheek by jowl with each other in this city. All of that is really quite wonderful and quite unique, and gives the city a very, very strong identity, I think. Yeah. So I do think that there is a Cape Townian identity, and I like that. And to the extent that we can develop it, we should.
Yeah, I saw in some of your media interviews you've spoken about some aspects about what we might call city life. What do people need to find fulfillment in the context of their city? And there's much to it, but what are some of these things that you think are important, and some of the things that you are working on or looking into?
What personally means a lot to me, let me just start with that, is a connection to the outdoors, and it's part of what I really love. What I think is just unmistakable, unmatchable about Cape Town is a connection to wild spaces, connection to the ocean, to
the mountains,
to our national parks, to the mountain. That is really wonderfully unique and very special, and I think part of Cape Town's identity and what makes people happy and whole and fulfilled in Cape Town. Then obviously safety is probably the number one concern for every family in South Africa, and that is something that is all too often far too lacking in South Africa, and that is true in Cape Town as well.
Yes,
it is not nearly as safe as it should be, and that is why so much of our effort is directed towards bridging the gap between the policing that South Africa has, which is provided for constitutionally by the national state and by the South African police. But there's this huge gap between what we have and what we need. And we try to use the limited powers afforded to us, but we use them in the most expansive way possible, and take the most expansive interpretation of those powers possible to try and stand in that gap between the policing we have and the policing we need. And hopefully achieve a modicum of greater safety for families over time. I think that's essential to a sense of fulfillment in a city. Then I think happy, beautiful public spaces, which we try to provide, and public facilities. And then, a sense that there is opportunity here for their children for the future. If you feel that your child can grow up here, and that they're going to be taken on their merits, that they're going to be taken for the value that they can add again, and that there will be a prospect of a better life for them, then that is essential. Yeah. And those are all the things that we are trying to work on in Cape Town. They try to grow the economy faster with some success. Try and get the city safer. Try and deliver excellent public services and public places. All about creating that sense of security, I think, is probably the all-encompassing word. How do you make someone feel secure that this is a good place to live and raise a child?
I saw you mention nightlife as something that is an important aspect.
And good coffee shops.
Yes, good coffee shops and nightlife. And why is nightlife important?
Well, I must be honest with you, not that I'm a great experiencer of nightlife anymore.
Yeah.
now in my late 30s, nightlife ends at about 9:30 for me. But I do think, obviously for younger people, a vibrant nightlife is essential, and one, again, to come back to this, in which you feel safe. Part of the reason that we felt that we had to take firm action on homeless encampments around the city, for example, was I got so many letters from young ladies in particular in the city who said they just don't feel safe going to restaurants, going to clubs at night. And so they were, many of those places were starting to shut down because of it. So it's lovely to see all of those customers coming back and Cape Town being healthy and flourishing again at night. Of course, it brings its slightly less savory elements as well. That's a feature of nightlife everywhere around the world. But you manage that within the law.
Yes. Something we spoke with quite a bit also with Helen Ziller is this, again, we mentioned this now as well, this difference between Cape Town and South Africa, but especially the topic of decentralization.
Yeah.
Now this is, I would say, very important from a provincial perspective to talk about the Western Cape, but not just the way it's important for the whole of South Africa. But the question that I have is, to what extent would a city like Cape Town benefit from a more decentralized South Africa with less power for the central government?
We are passionate believers in that, and we have tried to do, and do every day, try to drive that further and further. And we've done it in one sense surreptitiously, in that we just use the powers given to us, but take the most expansive interpretation and definition of those powers and really try and push the boundaries. And once a new boundary becomes accepted, you push it a bit further, and then that boundary becomes accepted and you push it a bit further. And in that way, we have gone very, very far into in areas of policing in particular, but other areas as well. And then there's another way in which you have to do it explicitly, not surreptitiously, where you actually have to argue for and advocate for and fight for additional powers. And we are doing that too, whether it be in running the public transport system. It's very hard to name a single city. None of the great cities that we've named here today could possibly function without running their own public transport system.
Yeah.
And yet that is what South African cities have to try to do. It's not really practical.
It's almost absent in South African cities, or it's largely insufficient.
Yeah. So there's a whole other kind of set of powers that we are fighting for explicitly, and will keep doing so. And I really think if you look at the direction of traffic, if you look at the judgments of the courts, they really are increasingly recognizing that the best possible future for South Africa is one in which you have really strong, powerful, decentralized powers at the local government level in particular, because the local government already has all these constitutional powers which say provincial governments don't necessarily have. So I'm a huge advocate for that, and will use whatever leverage I have to try and increase those powers, whether it be through the courts or through the gently way that I set out earlier. And I do think there's just one other important point I want to make. The idea of increasing internal competition is essential for South Africa's future. The absolute incredible miracle of innovation and dynamism that is the American economy is to a large degree built on American internal competition, the way that states and cities jostle for position and for ascendancy in that, and investment in that system. And it has built this unbelievable world-beating economy. I really think that this idea that everything, every policy, every legislation must be the same for South Africa is a strange concept for a country as big as ours. It's not Botswana, it's not Eswatini or Lesotho. It's an enormous country with a large population, and it makes total sense that different parts of the country should be able to try different things and see what delivers the best outcome for the public. And then other places might be persuaded to try a bit more of that as well.
Yeah. So one way to look at it, just considering the size of South Africa, is I actually grew up in the north. I grew up in Limpopo, in Tzaneen.
Yeah.
And So if you are born in Cape Town, you grew up in Cape Town, you spend your life here, you become a politician, you become a member of parliament, and you make laws that are applicable to people who live in Messina, the distance is the equivalent of someone in Messina making laws for the people of Uganda. So it's a big country, and the point that I think that you're making also is that in a country as big as South Africa, and that's why the US has succeeded, because they have different states. You need to have a bigger level of local autonomy.
Correct.
Because different regions, there are different peoples. We're not just one homogeneous South Africa. There's different communities, different languages, and so forth. And so if you don't have a decentralized approach, I just cannot see it being sustainable in the long run. So I
totally agree with that analysis.
I think we're being forced into decentralization. Hopefully, maybe that's the optimist.
Hopefully, absolutely. I think that the direction of traffic is well established now. There might be attempts to re-centralize things, but residents are increasingly rejecting that. Courts are increasingly rejecting that. Even policymakers are starting to realize this is not functioning. This is not functional. So hopefully, but just to build on your example, it's like, we argue a lot about police resource allocations in Cape Town, and police resource allocations are decided from Pretoria, from Tshwane.
Yes.
Where the people making those allocation decisions have never ever spent an hour, let alone a day or a week, on the Cape Flats. They do not know anything about the communities for whom they are deciding the policing resource allocations. That makes no sense. And yet the residents there have no way of holding those decision makers accountable, because they work and live in some distant place in Tshwane.
Yes.
That makes no sense.
Yeah, of course. So maybe if we take a step back and just make it a bit broader, we mentioned America and we mentioned Europe. It has been said a few times that 2016 was an important year for the world because of the Trump election and Brexit. But in some ways, 2024 might have been even more pivotal because of the return of Trump, but also because of elections in Europe, and Europe, sort of the pendulum starting to swing to the other side. So I'm curious what your perspective is on what we can learn from global developments in politics and how the world seems to be changing, and whether you think this is applicable also to our situation and what we can learn from that.
I think there's definitely a major response across the Western world. I think it's a major response to a sense, a feeling that there were some real excesses of the organized kind of identitarian left over the last few years. And that while I think hopefully all of us want our societies to be absolutely inclusive and welcoming spaces where people are valued for the content of their character and the value that they add, that some of those identitarian movements went way further than that, where they're just completely disconnected from reality. And there is absolutely a political backlash against that, which you see happening. I worry, though, I must be honest with you, I'm extremely skeptical about many of those now centre-right and even further right movements in Europe and America, that there will not be similarly unwelcoming and uninclusive excesses on that side as well.
Yes.
And that you have this overcorrection. This is a very common way in which the pendulum moves. There's first an overcorrection before a settling in the center. And I think I can't help but feel that something very important in the world is lost when politics gives way to really quite vacuous and alarming populism.
Yes.
Which we see in many of these right-wing movements across Europe and America. That these are not seriously minded people trying to focus on how to genuinely drive forward human progress, but that they are focused on power and the control of it, and how to manipulate people in the way that politicians have done for eons, by mobilizing them against a scapegoat, an imaginary or invented enemy.
Yeah.
So I worry about the trend in European and American politics. I struggle to find any kind of connection or resonance with it.
Yeah. So something that we've discussed a bit on this podcast in the past is the difference between being right-wing and being conservative.
Yeah, exactly. A critical difference.
Yes, and so what concerns me also in some of the conversations I've had with people in America and in Europe is if you ask them, for example,
what is a liberal?
Yeah, that also. But before we get to that, if you ask them, who are you? What do you stand for? What do you seek to achieve? And then the answer would be, we're against wokeness, or we need to destroy the left. Yeah. So in other 100%. Words, we have this problem of people on the right defining themselves by the thing that they want to destroy,
That's right.
as opposed to the thing that they actually want to achieve. And it's concerning if people on the right, if there's this shift, the pendulum is swinging more from the left to the right, but those people on the right who's sort of on the receiving end do not really know what it is that they want to achieve or what it is that they want to preserve. And for us at least, that's the difference between right-wing and conservative. To be conservative is to say, this is the thing that I want to protect. And to be right-wing is to say, that is the thing that I want to destroy. And I think, unfortunately, what we seem to be hearing on the left and the right, all over the world, is a lot of talk about the thing that needs to be destroyed, but little talk about the thing that needs to be preserved.
Yes, and that's why I say I can't help but feel that something important has been lost in the world when we see politics spinning into more and more isolationism of people inside of a country, where these kind of self-reinforcing echo chambers become ever stronger. And you only expose yourself to your own worldview, and you never engage with opposing or even slightly disagree, even polite disagreement. You never engage with it whatsoever. It is just, I am right, and there can be no, I mean, I am right in the sense I'm correct, not right. I am correct, and there can be no questioning of my position. And isolationist in the sense of this idea that like there's no such thing as a global community, there's no such thing as interconnectedness between the peoples of the world, that we must just only care for ourselves, and because some person happened to, by just complete lottery of life, born in a different part of the planet, we owe no moral responsibility to that person whatsoever. That's not the view that I take. I just worry that seems to be becoming the only ascendant view in the world. So that's why I say it is a difficult time. And of course these labels, obviously, like American culture is completely dominant in the world, not only in pop culture and music and food, but in everything. So the old concepts of conservative and liberal are completely lost because they've been completely taken over by the American definition of what those things are. In fact, they are no longer useful. I was having this debate with my wife in the holidays. We were, I think we were watching the aftermath of the U.S. elections, and American Republicans rail against this concept of liberals, and it makes it impossible for people to understand any of those labels. In fact, it makes it just impossible to use.
Yeah, in America, liberal and left-wing is largely synonymous.
Yes.
Yeah. So what does liberal mean to you then?
My own definition of it is responsible with public money, broadly fiscally restrained and quite conservative, interested in lowering taxes and limiting the size of the state, all with a view, this is really what underpins it, all with a view to maximizing the individual liberty of each person, so that they can use the wherewithal that they have to build the life that they value. So the role of the state, in my definition, is to maximize the opportunities that a person has to build a life of value for him or herself. And when it comes to what we could broadly term social issues, it's very kind of accepting and welcoming and inclusive. So that is my definition, and it's broadly aligned to what you may have called many years ago a classic liberal stance. Yeah. But unfortunately, those things have become so twisted now that I just basically have to stick with my definition and define it when asked.
So Jill Wenzel wrote a book, I think in the 80s, called The Liberal Slide Away.
Absolutely.
And she was concerned as a liberal that within the liberal community that there was this slide away happening, and she was speaking within the context of the ANC, and one of the issues she mentioned was that a lot of liberals already in the 80s could see that the ANC is maybe not this great angelic movement that people would like to believe, and she experienced that when she speaks out about that her fellow liberals are telling her, no, don't criticize the ANC. And so I think the point that she's making is that an internal concern about liberalism is that within sort of liberal communities or the liberal movement, a lot of people are hesitant to talk about certain issues, which leads to some form of a slide away, as she called it. Do you think this is a weakness in the liberal movement?
Oh, yes, I do think so. I mean, as in any philosophy, as in any movement, over time, there's this natural human tendency to develop a kind of orthodoxy, and the orthodoxy should not be questioned.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's quite ironic that happens even in the liberal movement, because that's kind of the idea, is that
it's ironic,
no one has a monopoly on the truth. We all might be wrong, so that's why we should be open to new ideas. But even there, it's just a normal human tendency. Once you feel comfortable about something as a group, that develops into an orthodoxy, and then it shouldn't be questioned. And it takes real effort and I suppose bravery to say, actually, there's nothing that's beyond questioning. And also this is critical to a proper definition of the concept of liberalism in politics is a commitment to free speech.
Yes, exactly.
That is absolutely essential.
And the irony comes in when people say, we're committed to free speech, but within this pursuit of free speech, there's certain things that you should not say these things.
Which is obviously internally contradictory.
Yes. So let's bring it back to Cape Town now. The South Africa has changed, or is changing also. We had the ruling party, the ANC, had a very bad election in 2024. They dropped.
Not quite bad enough.
Yeah, well, they dropped to 40%, but they're still in power.
Yeah.
And now there's a government of national unity.
Yeah.
But how has that impacted on Cape Town? Is Cape Town still the same?
It's the same but better. I think the GNU has provided opportunities for Cape Town, and we've already moved so that we can benefit. And I had this amazing interview late last year with a journalist who said to me, isn't Cape Town getting an unfair advantage from the GNU? And really? I had to chuckle at that question. It was, advantages come to those who work for them, and we've worked hard to advocate and lobby for these changes that we want. So we immediately got very favorable visa regime relaxations from the Minister of Home Affairs, my friend, an absolutely superb Minister of Home Affairs, by the way, Leon Schreiber. I think he will be the best Minister of Home Affairs in South Africa's history, by the way. So we got these immediate changes in visa regulations, which benefit Cape Town significantly. We got immediate assistance that we'd been asking for years from the Department of Public Works, dealing with all their broken and abandoned and illegally occupied buildings. We've never seen such swift movement from the DA's Minister of Public Works, Dean McPherson, and some other things besides. But of course, we don't run the entire government. It is a very awkward and somewhat fragile and fractious coalition. So we can't get everything, but we're going to carry on pushing particularly in those departments where we have now some leverage, for maximum advantage. Absolutely. I mean, it would be crazy if we didn't do that.
And so I'm wondering then what the consequences could be on the other side if the GNU fails.
Yeah.
Because I think a challenge for the DA is, it's in a certain sense there's an opportunity, but it's also it's like being between a rock and a hard place, because the DA's goal, a large part of it, is to keep the EFF and MK out. But on the other hand, the DA in the GNU now cannot become a rubber stamp for the ANC to implement whatever they want to implement. So this is national politics, but the question then is, at what point should the DA say, well, the GNU is not worth it, because we're just sort of rubber stamping the ANC in order to keep the
we cannot.
Is this something that you're discussing internally?
Sure, I mean, there is constant discussion about this, but we're always, the question in politics is always compared to what, right? So we have to walk this knife edge, because many people, many South Africans would argue that there's almost nothing as bad as a EFF MKP coalition government, EFF MK ANC coalition government, that would be so catastrophic for South Africa's future, and would so destroy our democratic institutions that it might be the last election that we have. It might, there's no end to the negative consequences of going down that road. And so we should try to make sure that the GNU survives to prevent that outcome. Of course, it would be much better, and that's why I say their election result wasn't quite bad enough. It would be much better if the DA was the larger party and the ANC was the minority party in that coalition. It would be better yet if there was no ANC, because they are terrible for South Africa, and really have just taken South Africa right to the brink of disaster and destruction. So there's no question of any kind of, what's the word, affection or anything like that. It is a coalition designed to prevent an infinitely worse alternative, and to try to do the best that we can possibly for the people of South Africa with the opportunity that we have. So for that reason, I really hope it survives. Of course, it may not. There's no doubt about that. It might blow up on any one of a number of very, very critical kind of issues for the public of South Africa. But we have to be extremely cautious about when we use that nuclear button.
Yes.
Because there's no going back from that. And then the next week, literally the week after that, we will have to all watch the coming into office, the arrival into office of an EFF MK ANC coalition. We must just keep that in our minds. That is the alternative.
I do think, however, a risk here is if people after 4 years or 5 years feel that the GNU is now the problem, then the parties that are part of the GNU become tainted with that.
And they will end it themselves.
And the question then is what would the impact of that be on the next election? I've actually heard one person say that he thinks the GNU would lead to the comeback of the ANC. Now, of course, many things can happen. A lot of things can happen. It's probably unlikely that the ANC would turn around the extent to which it has lost support.
But look, it's amazing to me how so many people speak with such certainty about the future.
Yeah.
I need to ask them. I need to ask them about the lotto numbers. Because, any number of things can happen.
Yes.
For example, what if the DA distinguishes itself so well in our portfolios and makes such an obvious positive difference that people actually say, you know what, no matter what I used to think of the DA, like them or hate them, I actually kind of like them being around. It's better to have them part of the government than not. That could also happen. Maybe we get wonderful economic growth and everyone assigns gratitude for that growth to the ANC rather than to the parties of the GNU, and the ANC does better. I honestly don't know. All that we can do is say we have this really unique and special opportunity to demonstrate the DA's difference in government. It's not the whole government, but it's part of government. Let's do the absolute best we can in the shortest amount of time, because we don't know how long it's going to last. Let's try and make a positive difference for the country.
Now, I'm sort of jumping topics here. I'm sort of starting to close off the discussion. I'm curious on how you would describe your own approach, your own leadership approach or managerial approach. And part of the reason why I'm asking this is something that I've noticed about you, and we've discussed a bit before the interview also, not with you, but you sort of have a unique approach to social media. You had those videos on social media where you walk around and ask people who's the mayor of Cape Town, and you have almost a more informal, I almost want to say quirky approach to communication. So how would you describe your own approach and your communications approach?
I think it's an outflowing of my personality. I've tried to never take myself too seriously. The politics, or the world, I suppose, politics and business everywhere is so full of these puffed up, self-important people that are just, well, I won't use rude words on your podcast, but they're just, it's pathetic.
Yeah.
And I've always just taken the approach of, this is a great opportunity that I have now to make a positive difference. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of things wrong. I don't take myself all that seriously, and importantly also, I don't rely on a huge amount of public validation, to be honest. That's not where I get my sense of kind of self-worth from. So it doesn't really matter to me that I don't take it too seriously or personally that people might respond negatively. I'm just going to say what I think and I believe, try and do my best, and either you'll like it or not, frankly.
Yep.
And so I think that I try to just reflect that in my approach. It also helps to genuinely love people. I'm very much a people's person, and love to talk to people because everyone has a fascinating story. If you just scratch below the surface for 5 minutes, you'll get to a fascinating story. And I love to find those things out and hear where people come from and how they've got to where they are. So that really helps. And then in the city, I worked for Helen for 5 years, and Helen taught me almost everything that is really good and important about politics. Helen is always the most prepared person in the room. And she works slavishly and obsessively to make sure that she is. I'm not sure that I'm at that level yet, but I saw that in action for 5 years and really admire that. So I work a lot on the detail and make sure that I can answer and have a grasp of issues in detail. And get a sense of the what I call the customer experience. I feel like if you don't have a sense of what the customer experience is, in our case the residents' experience, the voters' experience, and how they are experiencing what you are doing and what you are saying, then you really are disconnected. So I like to spend a lot of time in the city, checking things out. This is another one of Helen's rules. Get in the car and go and see it for yourself.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times that has been invaluable to me in actually getting to the truth. Because the fact is, and I saw this in Parliament all the time when I was an MP, if you rely on the PowerPoint presentation that the government officials give you, you would swear there's not a single problem in South Africa. Everything is solved. Because on PowerPoint, it's all great. And unless you go and see, you will not see the truth of what's actually happening. There's just a few simple rules that have stood me in good stead so far.
Yeah. So this brings me to another question. I'll ask it as an anecdote, and then you can respond to the anecdote. After his presidency, Bill Clinton had an interview at some panel discussion, some forum, and someone, I think the question was, what is the most difficult thing about being president? And he gave an answer that I think was a really good answer, and I think an answer that is not just applicable to being president, but to being in any leadership position, especially a political position. And he said, it's actually fulfilling your mandate or the promises you made, because when you campaign, you have a manifesto and you make all these promises about everything that's going to change and everything that you intend to do. And the moment you step into office, you get flooded with everything else. And you get flooded with things that you have to respond to. And you cannot ignore these things, but these things that you have to respond to take up all your time or most of your time. And so he thinks the most difficult part or most important part of being president or being a leader is managing this balance between responding to all the stuff that's coming in and actually implementing the things that you said you would implement. So to what extent is this a reality or a challenge for you?
That's a great answer. Bill Clinton is right there. I agree with him. I must go check out the interview. But I've likened it to standing in front of an open fire hydrant, blasting water at you, and you're trying to drink. That's how it feels like to get into government, because there is just constant, everyday, all day, relentless issues that are coming at you. And you have to be really disciplined. And this is the only way to succeed, I think, is to be really disciplined about carving out sufficient time in your diary to focus on your core objectives that you set out at the beginning of your term, and not allow every minute of every day to be absorbed by the reactive, because it's very easy for that to happen. I haven't looked at my phone during the course of this interview, but I can assure you there's probably 50 or 60 new WhatsApps just since we've been talking, of mostly members of the public or colleagues, various demands on your time. And if you do that, that is all you will do. You will literally just sit in your office and do that all day. And you will not be strategic. You will not be focused on the things that you actually want to get done that are important for the future of the city. So I totally agree with that answer. I would add one other thing, though, and I think this is true of all leadership positions, is people management. It's hard to manage the different personalities, egos, fears, anxieties that exist in a huge team that have to collectively deliver on your outcomes that you've pledged to the public. You do not personally deliver all the outcomes. A lot of your job is the leadership of this team, and that is, I think, one of the most challenging aspects of leadership is keeping that team together, focused, working positively, not collapsing over every disagreement and or personality spat or whatever it is. Keeping them focused and positive is a constant job as well.
Yeah. Well, Geordin Hill-Lewis, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great conversation, and again, thank you for speaking with us in this wonderful city, and best of luck.
Welcome, and you're welcome to stay longer, like many other Pretorians.
Yes.
Pretorianers.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Aaron Strutz. If you support this podcast and the work that we are involved with as the Afrikaner Foundation and the broader solidarity movement in South Africa, I want to encourage you to become a more active supporter. You can do this first and foremost by subscribing to our various social media channels, by leaving a comment and sharing what you have seen. But other than that, also by making a small monthly contribution to the work that we are doing through the Afrikaner Foundation's website, or by making a once-off donation. Links in the description.